everybody, welcome back to the Dixiecryptid channel. How's our people? I really appreciate you clicking on the video. I've got victim number 4, interview victim number 4 on the line. His name is Chet. Chet got in touch with me via email, I think maybe Facebook Messenger, and his story was really interesting. And the first thing I did was say, hey, how about considering doing an interview? And he said, sounds good to me. Chet, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good today. It's kind of cold here, but it is what it is.
Yeah, where are you?
I'm living in Middle Tennessee right now, but what happened to me was actually in Kanawha City, West Virginia.
Okay, in West Virginia. Here's the deal with this interview. I am coming in cold on this. Chet, we talked a little while ago, and he started telling me the story, and I said, well, I want you to hold back, and I want you to tell the whole thing one time for our audience instead of having to do it twice for me. So I don't really know what he's going to talk about, but it sounds, just from the little high points I've heard, it sounds very interesting. Chet, why don't you just start from the beginning and just tell us about your experiences with these creatures?
Absolutely. Well, right after school, early 1988, we moved from Rand, West Virginia to Kanawha City. And if you look up at Kanawha Mall in Kanawha City, West Virginia, it's close to Charleston. There's a road that goes right behind it after you cross the railroad tracks. It's called 57th Street. And if you go straight on up that road after you pass Victory Avenue, I believe that's the name of the road that I lived on, it turns into a really steep hill going on up the hill. And at the bottom of that hill on the left-hand side, there is a steep gully. And bear with me, this has Kurt later. Anyway, it is so steep that you cannot climb it. Well, on up that road, there was a couple of friends that I met. We would go down in that gully, and we actually had to dig in a foothold to climb up it. We would go down and up the other side, and there was an old logging road, and that's as far as they were allowed to go into the woods. Literally, it was maybe 100 feet from their back door where that logging road was, but that's as far as in the woods as they could go, and it was clear right there. Well, if you go down Victory Avenue, the house is now gone, but out my back door, I could reach out my back door and touch the mountainside. It was that close. And I learned that if I went up that mountain, that logging road circled around, and I could take a shortcut over to my friend's house. Now, that hill on 57th Street was so steep that you did not ride a bicycle down that part of that hill, because if you hit the brakes, the back tire would slide and you wouldn't slow down at all. Walking up and down it was a chore, so I always cut through the woods. In hindsight, years later, I realized that, right before dark, all the kids had to be inside. Everybody ate dinner. They went to bed. All the lights were shut off. And I thought that was odd. Well, anyway, I went and I explored a lot of the woods and went fishing a lot because home life wasn't very good at all. Well, I had an alcoholic father, and he wasn't very nice, so the more time I spent out in the woods and outside, the better off I was.
Let me stop you real quick. How far back are we going here? Is this 10, 15, 20 years ago?
This is over 30 years ago.
Okay, good deal. And so you had problems at home, and you're ready to get out. Carry on.
Anyway, none of the kids were allowed to go play in the woods, but my parents didn't care. I grew up in the mountains of West Virginia. I'd seen bears and mountain lions and all that. I've dealt with them. I was no stranger to the woods and forests, and many times I camped out by myself, makeshift shelters. Well, my friends, they got in trouble a lot. When they got grounded, it was usually for a week or two, and it was normally for, getting into fights or with each other or whatever. They're brothers, they're going to fight. So when they would get in trouble, I would spend my time hiking back up behind the house in the woods and mountains, going further and further. After research recently, I realized that I was actually hiking back into the backside, the far back end of Kanawha National Forest, where there's no hiking trails, there's no camping area, it's just woods. And another strange thing that I realized years later is I never saw any deer. I never saw any deer in that area. I never saw any bears. It was just squirrels and birds, but they weren't as thick as you would expect them to be. Anyway, I really enjoyed going up in there in the woods and doing the occasional overnight camping trip, and I would explore further and further. And there was a few times where I got this shnikey feeling that I was being watched, or I was in danger, and I would just turn around and go home. And it wasn't unusual for me to hear a tree limb break literally on every trip that I made up into the mountains. I would hear limbs breaking and stuff like that, and I just always blew it off as dead falls. I didn't watch a whole lot of TV, didn't deal with news or anything, so I didn't know a whole lot about cryptids or anything like that other than reading a book on werewolves and vampires and stuff like that. But I really didn't know anything about wood apes or Sasquatch or Yeti. I had no clue about that. I didn't know they existed. I didn't know there was any documentation out there at this point in my life. Well, after doing this for several months, I started noticing large barefoot footprints in the grass in my yard, and in the early morning in the dew. I would follow them a little bit, and they'd go up in the woods, and they would disappear, and I had no idea what this was. Well, we had a decent rain one evening. It cleared off after a couple hours. This was in August of 1988. In the early morning, I saw these tracks go up in the woods, and they were very clearly defined in the wet leaves. So I decided to follow them. Well, I grabbed my cheap survival knife and my canteen, and I headed up into the woods, and I followed them. And I followed them for probably, I would say, almost a half a day. But I followed them way up through there. And I come to this nice mountaintop, and there was tree limbs and sticks and stuff like that leaned up into teepees. And I thought it was pretty neat, although I never thought about how they actually got into that position. Well, I gathered a bunch of these up, and I made myself a nice little lean-to, planning on camping out a couple of days, spending the night up there. It was really neat. There was also a lake. Well, not really a lake, but a pond a few hundred yards away, and I figured I'd try out the fishing there as well. I was an avid fisherman. So I built my little lean-to shelter, and I headed back to the house. Well, a few days later, I went up there, and my shelter was destroyed. So I rebuilt it. I had also read the book White Fang, so I knew kind of how animals mark their territory and stuff. Plus, growing up in the mountains, I knew if bears were in your trash can, you'd pour ammonia on your trash cans to run the bears off. So I thought this was a great idea to protect my little camp that I found because I really liked it. So I went back home, and I got me a spray bottle of ammonia set up. And the next day I went up there, it was tore up, so I rebuilt it again, and I sprayed the area down with ammonia. Big mistake. Anyway, I decided not to camp out over the night there because my friends were going to be off grounding the next morning. I went up there and I hung out with them, and we stayed out too late, and they got grounded again for 2 weeks. So I decided to go camping the next day. I went back up to my little camp, and what I saw terrified me. All the small trees, anything smaller than 10 inches was snapped off, like 6 to 8 feet up in the air and thrown. It
Whoa.
looked like a tornado hit that hilltop. I had made something very, very angry.
Oh, man.
And there was a horrible smell, but I've never seen anything like it. It was literally like a tornado come down on top of that mountain and broke all the trees off. And I got that, snikey feeling again. So I picked up me a pole that I found that was about 6 foot long, and I took my knife and sharpened it into a spear just to help calm my nerves. Because this was bad, and of course there was this horrible smell up there, plus a strong smell of urine and ammonia, and it was really nerve wracking because I felt like something was watching me, and I had this imminent feeling of malice. It's kind of like the feeling you get whenever you walk up on a dog and it's snarling and growling. That's the feeling you get. But add that to not knowing where it's coming from.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got you. I'm 100% with you.
Well, I turned around and I slowly walked back out of those woods. And whenever I would step, it was like my steps were echoing at this point. It's a hard thing to explain, but it's like every step has an echo. Like something was walking in tune with me, and when I would stop, it would stop. I'd reach down and move the leaves with my hand, and the sound didn't echo at that point. And I'd look around and, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting chills right now talking about this.
It's okay, man.
I've never spoken about this part of it to anyone ever.
Wow. Take your time. Just take your time.
Anyway, I worked my way slowly out of the mountains, looking over my shoulder, and I knew I was in danger. I could feel it in my bones. I knew the closest place from where I was my friend's house. Well, instead of going home, I went over to my friend's house, and I crossed the gully and went down there, and they were outside doing yard work. So I sat down on the picnic table, and I talked to them. While they were doing yard work, they were allowed to do that, but they weren't allowed to play or anything. And we talked, and it started getting dark, and the parents didn't call them in early, as everybody in that area did. We were out there, and it got dark, and the street lights come on, and they got in trouble again. And I don't know what it was about that area at that time, but anytime somebody was out after dark, I mean, the adults would scream at you to get your butt in the house. Nobody was allowed after dark, which was unusual at that time and, that date.
Right.
That you weren't allowed to run the street to play. And I was soon to find out why. Well, they got in trouble. They got grounded further and sent in the house, and I was sent home. So I picked up my homemade spear, and that's whenever I remembered why I made the spear and why I'd even gone over there, because I felt like I was being followed. And again, to remind you, the only place to cross this ravine was where we had made it, and I was sitting right there by it, so I know nothing crossed the ravine there. The rest of it was choked with blackberry bushes and vines and loose rocks and stuff, and there was no possible way to climb it. Even if you had climbing gear, you couldn't get out of there because of the brush. Well, I left their house, and I started heading down 57th Street towards Victory Avenue, towards home, which was roughly a mile and a quarter away, and it was dark. There were street lamps on the left-hand side of the road, but the right-hand side of the road where the gully was, there were street lights. But there was an old abandoned house that was falling down. It was a red brick house. I started walking down through there, and I was a little bit nervous, but I'm like, okay, I've got street lights, I'm on a road, there's houses nearby, I'm safe. But when I came to that old abandoned house, I got that snaky feeling to the point where I felt my life was in danger when I got there. It was strange, having that feeling, but yet there's nothing to trigger that feeling. Well, I started slowing my walking down, and, my head was on a swivel, and I'm looking around, what's going on. I got to the beginning of the house, and the smell hit me. Again, I knew I was in trouble, but I had no place else to go. I had no other direction to go but down the road. And I just prayed that I could tiptoe past whatever was going on and make it past it. But when I got to the other side of the house, I heard a noise in the bushes. And I looked over, and about 10 feet away from me, this large figure was hunted down in the bushes, eating, I guess, grapes and blackberries that were there. And I looked eyes with it. And it slowly stood up. We're not talking how a bear stands up. This is how a human stands up. It had extremely long arms. I couldn't see his hands due to the bushes. But the bushes were almost chest deep to me. And at the time, I was about 5'6". It had to be at least 8 to 8.5 feet tall. Its shoulders were about 4 feet wide. And if you've ever seen pictures or video of a bear standing up, they really don't have definable shoulders. I stood there and I looked at this thing that it seemed like an eternity, but it was only probably 2 or 3 seconds. And then it let out a screaming roar. The only way I could describe the force of this roar was standing in front of a 250 decibel train horn. It felt like it physically hit me when it screamed. And when it did, I dropped my spear and I ran. And I ran for everything I had. I ran for my life. And I don't think an Olympic track star could have kept up with me at that point.
Man.
It crashed through the bushes, and I think it may have tripped, or if it did, it hit its hands on the ground and jerked back up on 2 feet, and it come after me. This thing come after me like the fires of heck were on our tails. And I ran down that hill just as fast as I could, and it only seemed like it was a couple of seconds to run that 3/4 of a mile down to that turn. And when I hit the turnoff to my road, I literally leaned myself over like you do on a motorcycle to make that turn. And when I did, it had snatched my shirt. It grabbed the collar of my shirt, and it yanked. And I felt its claws or fingernails go down my back, and it ripped my shirt off of me. I continued to run until I hit the house. I snatched open my front door, slammed it shut, locked it, and dove under my bed in hysterics. I was in shock.
Man.
My bedroom, built onto the front of this house, was picture windows. It had a 3-foot wall, and it was just picture windows all the way around with curtains up. And that was my room. I slept in, my room was in the screened-in porch. Well, my dad came in there, and he grabbed me by the ankle and yanked me out from under the bed. I was screaming and swinging, and he slapped my face and shook me and told me to get a hold of myself and dragged me in the living room and threw me in a chair. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I told him, "Something chased me home." and it almost got me. And I said, it ripped my shirt. Well, they had me stand up, and there was fingernail marks on my back, and they were widely spaced, too widely spaced to be a human hand. It was a massive hand that did it. My sister said I was making it up until they seen my back, and my mom actually took a picture of it, which I've been looking for it, but I can't find it. But after I started telling my dad that something followed me out of the mountains over to my friend's house and then it chased me home, he walked over to the window and he pulled the curtain open just an inch or so to look out. And when he turned back, his face was white as a sheet. And he looked at me and he goes, "Boy," he said, "what the heck did you bring out of those mountains to us?" And I told him, I said, I don't know what it is. He started turning off the lights. He said, "Everybody be quiet and go to bed. And when my dad told you to do something, you did it." So I went to bed, and I guess when I started calming down a little bit, the adrenaline left me, and I did an adrenaline crash. And if you've ever had that, once you hit the crash, you're out. Anyway, I was out for a while. I guess it was an adrenaline crash or faint or something, but I was woke up a few hours later with something outside my windows in my room, and three walls of my room was all windows, curtains, heavy drapes, and I could hear it outside my windows sniffing and touching the windows. I mean, people have heard deer blow whenever they scent a human, and this was much, much louder, much more forceful. And with the street light outside, I could see this massive shadow going around my room. So I eased off of the bed, and I pulled my blankets under the bed, hid back in the corner, and either fainted or finally fell asleep from exhaustion until I was awakened the next morning by my mom. Well, anyway, I asked my dad what he saw, and he would not talk about it. He said, "I didn't see anything. You keep your mouth shut. You don't talk about it." It didn't happen. And that was the response I got. And that was the only time my father ever talked about it. It was over 20 years later before my mom talked about it. But a few times a week after that, I could hear this thing outside of my bedroom windows sniffing and touching the windows, and there'd be muddy footprints or muddy handprints on the windows and massive footprints around the house. I wasn't allowed to talk about it. Of course, it was absolutely terrifying to have this going on. Well, after a couple of weeks, there was a night that I didn't hear it. I walked over to the window, and I gently eased the curtain open to look out to see if it was out there, to see if it had finally given up. I knew there was street lights outside of my house, so I should have been able to see, but all I saw was like blackness outside. I thought that was strange until it moved, and it ducked down, and it put its face right up against the window in front of me. It had a look of malice on its face. It was extremely angry whenever its face was in front of mine, and its face was probably 4 inches away from mine. That next morning, I told my father about it, and within a week, we had moved. We actually moved to get away from this thing. It angered it so bad, it was stalking us, and I knew that if I went back up in those woods again, it would have probably torn me apart. Anyway, I'm sorry if my voice was shaking and stuff, but this is the first time that I've talked about this at length. But we actually ended up moving to South Carolina from West Virginia because of this.
I've never heard a story quite like that. So tell us. I know it's hard to talk about this stuff, but tell us. You were telling me earlier that you've told the story, but you've just hit the high points with other people, and you have some warnings about the ammonia and all. Get into that a little bit.
Well, whenever I went up there to my camp and something had tore it up, ammonia is what people use to run bears, raccoons, and mountain lions and stuff like that out of the yard, and it's a humane way to do it because ammonia is basically a urea smell. And it's a very potent smell, and it marks a territory, and it's a very dominant smell of that animals use to mark territory, and it's stronger than anything you're going to find in nature. So anytime an animal smells it, they think that there's a apex dominant predator in the area, and they want to leave that alone. And my mistake was going up there and marking this thing's territory with ammonia and making it mad.
Man, that is... It's like
it was a dumb idea.
You couldn't have picked the worst thing in the world to do. That's crazy.
Well, I was 13 and I had no idea what these structures were, and they were warnings. And I took down its structures saying, basically, yeah, I don't care that you're marking your territory, and here, have some ammonia because I'm marking it better than you. And
it's not funny. It's not funny, but I mean, if you stand back and
years
look,
later,
right,
it is funny. Well, 31 years later, yeah, it is funny. It was stupid if you weren't there, and I could still kind of laugh about it after the fact, after all these years. But at the time, nobody thought that was funny at all.
You know, a lot of these people out hunting for Bigfoot, tracking Bigfoot, trying to get sightings. This may be a way to do it. I mean,
You don't want to do that.
I've never heard of anybody doing that, and that's oh my gosh.
Well, it could be that a lot of people on Missing 411 tried that.
Oh.
I mean, every year there are a lot of hikers and people that are camping and stuff like that disappear every year without a trace. It could be that they tried that. You never know.
That's a great point. Again, I haven't studied the 411 cases that closely. I've heard a few, but you've just brought up a real interesting thing here. Now, there's some other things you haven't told anyone else that you just told the people listening. And what was it, when you went to the window?
Yeah, I've never told anybody at all, including my mother, which I've talked to her and gave her a lot of details. But you guys are the only ones that I've ever told about pulling the curtain back that night and it being face to face. My dad apparently has looked out the window a couple of times because, he used to work for Charleston Parks and Recreation, and he would leave for work at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sure he saw something or experienced something around that same point because it was not long after that. He was looking for a place to go, and we didn't even find a place. We just rented a U-Haul and threw everything we could in the U-Haul truck and threw the old station wagon on a car dolly and just headed south until he deemed we were low enough on money to find a place. We had no plan where we were moving. We just went south. Is
your father still living?
No, he actually died a week before my 21st birthday.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My mom passed away a few months ago. I still have all her picture albums, and I need to go through them to see if I could find any pictures of like the claw marks on my back or the footprints that I had taken. But they're old Polaroid Instamatic, and of course back then, whenever this was going on, it never crossed my mind to get out this old flip-top Polaroid Instamatic because the flash always hit on those cameras. You couldn't turn it off. And I was afraid of taking a picture or trying to take a picture and triggering an attack because it was just thin glass wood that was between me and it, sometimes just a few inches. And this thing could have destroyed the house and killed everybody in the house. And nobody in the area would have said or done anything because, as soon as dark hit, all lights were out. Everybody was in bed. And I think that whole area was terrified of this thing. There is one thing I did omit, and I need to reflect back on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was an old Indian. Well, everybody said he was an Indian. He had long gray hair and he had the tan leather face. He was an old man. And he'd always sit out on his porch. And he was further down. Well, he was between 57th Street and my house on Victory Avenue. When you walked by his house, he was sitting out on his front porch. He was always on his front porch, smoking his pipe, and he had a double-barrel shotgun in his lap. When you saw him, that's where he was on that porch with that shotgun. After I'd been out there several months, when I walked by there, he never talked to anybody. And when I walked by there one particular day, he said, "Hey, boy." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he looked at me and goes, "Stay out of the woods. There's things out there you don't understand."
Wow.
And I said, "What do you mean?" And he got up and he walked in the house. But if you talk to people in that area or you try to ask questions, that's what you're going to get is they're going to get up and they're going to walk in the house and they're going to shut the door. I think a lot of people out there know what is out there. They know not to provoke it, and my 13-year-old butt provoked it.
Man, I'm just speechless. I know your mom and dad have passed away, but did you all have discussions about this after this event at all?
Me and my mother did. It was, like I said, it was years later that we had discussions, and I was 40 at that time. Now I'm 44 when we had discussions. and she was talking about her dad, which was a old school backwoods West Virginia coal miner, hunter, and fisherman. And he always warned the kids to stay out of the woods whenever it starts getting dark because there's boogers out there, and those boogers will get you. And apparently my grandpa had experiences, but he never spoke about it. I mean, my grandpa was, mostly Cherokee Indian, and, he was a quiet, strong man. And he was, as far backwoods hillbilly as you could get. But he didn't talk about it. He always warned people, stay out of the woods whenever it starts getting dark because there's boogers out there, and don't you go very far in the woods. But shoot, whenever I was around my grandpa, or up in Man, West Virginia, daytime we were out there at the coal mines on the weekends playing in the slate piles and playing in the coal mines. We'd get a whooping for it, but we still did it. I mean, that's what we did.
Right.
And we always went back in the woods hunting and shooting squirrels, and with our BB guns or slingshots or bows and arrows, and that's how I grew up. But whenever the sun started coming down in that area, you made sure you were at home for supper, and I never understood why. And recently I understand why, because I believe these are mostly nocturnal. When the sun starts going down, you better be in the house.
And I hate to drag you back to the window when you looked out the window or when you saw it, on your walk home. But do you remember, were you able to pick out any details, or could you share with anybody listening what you remember about its appearance?
Absolutely. It's burned in my memory forever, which I didn't even know what it was until my 20s, which was 7-8 years later after my experiences. I had no idea what this thing was for years. Anyway, whenever it stood up in the bushes, I could tell you it had no neck. It looked like it had no neck whatsoever, like gorillas. And I would not call what it's covered with as fur. It was more hair. It was more hair-like than fur. It was completely covered in it except for most of its face. It had almost no nose like a gorilla, and its head was kind of sort of conical shape, but not really. It didn't have a rounded top head. It was slightly domed. It had a pronounced brow, and its eyes were black. You know how cat's eyes are; they turn black when it's dark. There was almost no whites to the eyes whatsoever, and its eyes were slightly squinted in malice, and it was baring its teeth, and it had gorilla-like teeth, mostly human, with a couple of canines in its teeth. When I saw it stand up, its arms were overly long. They went past the waist. I would say the shoulders were at least 4 feet wide, and it was heavily muscled. The fur was kind of a dark, like a northern deer color. You know how the southern deer have a lighter brown? Well, the northern deer have a darker brown fur with kind of black tips or darker tips on the fur. But it wasn't fur; it was more hair. It wasn't coarse like a horse's mane. It was more like human hair all over its body. I cannot explain how massively muscled this thing was, and it was definitely male. It had pectoral muscles. It was massive, and it looked like it could literally tear me in half with no problem whatsoever. And at the time, I was 160 pounds. I was in great shape. I've been hiking the mountains all my life. I could start at the bottom of a mountain, and I could run up a good mountain for a half a mile and be barely winded at the top. I was in great shape. There was no way that I could ever compete with this thing. I don't think the biggest wrestler on TV could compete in strength with this thing if they used one hand and they used their whole body. Anything that can snap an 8-inch thick oak tree in two is not something to mess with, and I messed with it, unfortunately. When I looked it straight in the face in the window, its head was just unbelievably large compared to mine. And it still had that look of malice on its face with a pronounced brow. It was like a cross between a monkey and a caveman in the face. Those black eyes, it wasn't like the lifeless black eyes of a shark. People with shark attacks would say there was these black eyes and they were lifeless. It wasn't lifeless. There was an intelligence in those eyes that was almost as terrifying as the presence of this animal. I can't really describe the force of that scream other than standing in front of a train and it blasts the horn and multiply that times 2. It was almost powerful enough to make your ears ring, and it was a physical force that hit me when the thing screamed.
And you're sure it tracked you back down that mountain?
I know it did.
Okay.
It followed the exact same trail that I took. I would always take the same path when I'd go up, and when I followed its prints that morning that I went up there to spray the ammonia, its tracks were on the exact same trail that I had taken many times. It could track you like a wolf, or a mountain lion follows scent, or a bloodhound follows scent. This thing can track your scent. I can understand why it's so elusive, because if you live out in the woods or you go hunting a lot, a deer or like a doe in the fall can start walking and stop. And if you look in that direction to try to find it, it's not there. You won't see it until it moves.
Yep.
Because it blends in so well. They're really hard to see. And if you've ever tried to take a picture of a deer in the woods at distance with a phone or a camera, your camera wants to focus on closer stuff instead of stuff farther away. And I can definitely understand why this thing is so hard to take pictures of. And as far as trail cameras are concerned, people put out trail cameras all the time. And I don't care how good you put a cover scent on, you're sent out there to a bloodhound. They've done, like, you watch Mythbusters, and they did this thing where they went to extreme lengths to beat a dog tracking humans, and they could not beat it, no matter what they did. So there's always a little bit of a scent trail that you leave, and this thing will smell your scent trail, and it can easily avoid this area. I mean, they're not stupid. They live in this environment. They survive in this environment, and they're not a prey animal like a deer that are more vulnerable. They're a predator, and predators are a lot harder to find, especially large predators.
Yeah, I agree with that. These animals that live in the woods, that's all they ever see. But anyway, all these animals, they know the woods, and I've known this since I was young. It just takes a minute to look around and go, I'm out here once a week hunting. I don't notice anything different, but I'm telling you, if there's a branch missing, if there's animals in the woods, they notice everything. And so you're 100% right. Now, at what point in your life did you connect it with Bigfoot? Did you kind of settle on the thought that this is Bigfoot?
Well, it was actually whenever I was in my senior year in high school, going through the library. And I don't remember what book it was, but we were doing some reading on some fiction reading. I was going through the library looking at different books, and I can't remember the name of the book, but I pulled this book out, and there was a sketch on the cover. It gave me chills, and it brought tears to my eyes because it was really close to what I had seen. I mean, it happened when I was 13. I was 18 years old before I actually, saw a rendition of this. Like I said, I grew up in the back hills of West Virginia. I didn't watch TV, didn't care about TV. We didn't watch the Saturday morning cartoon, and I didn't watch the news. I spent my time out hunting and fishing. So the only, media influence that I had in my life was whenever I was in my senior year in high school. And that's when I ran across this book, and I finally saw what I had seen years ago that I tried to put behind me. And, of course, the name for it was Bigfoot. And I got kind of excited about seeing that picture and finally putting a name to what I saw, because I just called it the big hairy monster up to that point in my mind. When I saw it, a couple of my good friends, I was like, hey, I just found out what I had seen years ago. I saw a Bigfoot, and that's when the ridicule happened.
Oh, man.
And I just, I was excited to finally put a name to my biggest fear. It just ruined me on telling anybody about it. That's why I'm so nervous today about still talking about it, because of that experience that I was finally able to put a name to my nightmares just to be laughed at about it.
Yeah, well, that, you kind of expect that in this topic. I mentioned some of that in my last video, that people laugh at me when I talk about it, but it's like, well, I mean, it's an interesting subject. Of course, I've never had an experience to share with someone, but when you get it from the so-called know-it-alls, the walking encyclopedias on Bigfoot, that's when it really bothers you, because, they have everything fit in a box, and we don't know that much about these creatures, in my opinion. And Well, it's not my opinion. We just don't know that much about them. And so, I mean, there's an element of that we all have to deal with. But I feel bad for you because it was a tough experience. And, you want to tell somebody, I don't really know what to say other than it just goes with the territory. Since
Well,
then,
all these so-called experts and all these naysayers and people that want to make fun of you, let's come up with a little bit of money. I'll take some time off work and let's go hiking. I'll take you up there. I'm pretty sure there's still something around there. But I will tell you that I'm going to be carrying my Magnum pistol with me, and you're going to lead the way. Because if it comes after you, I'm going to outrun you because I'm going to shoot you in the leg and give it something to play with while I get away. I tell you, it's affected me so much that, whenever I get off work late at night, I get out of my car or my truck with my pistol in my hand with a flashlight still looking around because I still live kind of in the woods, and I still, every time outside at night, I've got my pistol with me. It's for security. I know it's not going to do a whole lot of good because I could tell you I could probably shoot this thing with a 30-30, and if I don't break its neck, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, they're from most reports, they're a huge animal, and you can't kill a. I mean, it takes a really good shot to put a bear down, a headshot or break its spine or whatever. So these things would be the same. They would be the same. Now, since all this has happened and 30 years have gone by, have you had any other indications, either where you live now or have you gone back? Or you mentioned there were some things that moving forward in your life that you'd like to mention. Just feel free to tell us about that.
Well, I live in Middle Tennessee, and I live in a holler. And if people don't know what a holler is, it's a valley or, whatever in the mountains that people build houses at. And the reason why it's called a holler is because there was no phone lines up in for years and years and years. And if you wanted to get somebody's attention, you hollered down the hill. A lot of people don't know that. That's a backwoods hillbilly thing. And of course, my YouTube channel, Hillbilly Holler, because I live in a holler and I'm a hillbilly. But yeah, I've had a few indications of activity out here as well. I found large footprints in the grass for a good view, but it's always around deer season in the middle of rut. My deer season is not as good as other people, and I always archery hunt, but since that incident, I've gotten maybe 300 or 400 yards back in the woods at that point. I've not gone farther than that since that happened until I've started watching your channel and, seeing the great listeners and their comments and, them understanding that this thing does affect people. And it's helped me to overcome a lot of things. And it's helped me to come forward and be able to speak about what happened to me when I was 13. So I've actually been able to go further back in the woods, but I'm very cautious. But yeah, I've had a few things. In fact, not long ago, probably 2 months ago, my wife was asleep in her bedroom while I was at work, and she heard somebody out by our koi pond. Well, she heard something, not somebody, but something out by our koi pond. And it sounded like they were talking in a deep, guttural voice in a foreign language, which was strange. But then again, our koi pond's the only consistent source of water in the area for a few miles. She heard this, and she turned on the light back by the back bedroom, which back door opens up to the koi pond and patio where the hot tub is. And she saw a large figure hunched down out there that took off running up the hill. But it was sometimes on all fours and sometimes on two legs. But it looked like it was more comfortable on two legs than all four. And all she saw was the back. But it was a deep, guttural voice that sounded like it was speaking a foreign language, like gibberish.
Whoa.
And she heard that. And, of course, we've heard, like, small stones tossed up on the roof, which, I've cleaned out the gutters, and I found small creek rocks in the creek. The nearest creek is about 100 yards from the house. And these are creek gravel that I found in my gutters on the back of the house. Now, last deer season, I put out a salt block about 200 yards up the mountain. I put it out there. It was a salt mineral block you could buy at Tractor Supply for $6. And I do have cameras covering the front of my property and part of my neighbor's property. To get this salt block out of there, you'd have to walk 2 to 2.5 miles through the mountain thick brush, which I don't hunt out that area because it's so thick. I mean, you're going to walk out through the machete to get out. But this salt block, a 50-pound salt mineral block, disappeared the day after I put it out there. And it was carried off. And I mean, who's going to carry a 50-pound salt mineral block that costs $6 or $7 2 miles through the wilderness through this rough terrain?
You would think a crackhead would do it and try to pawn it, but they're not going to do that. They're not going to. No, you're right. Nobody's going to steal a 50-pound salt block.
See, I work in a mechanic shop and tire shop, and I mean, I pick up 200-pound tires every day. There is no way. I mean, you could pay me $200. I am not going to carry that salt mineral block that far to get away with it. There is no way I'd be willing to do it. It's not worth it. And I have no idea how that disappeared. And I've had game cameras smashed. I have to see if I can get the old computer to boot up. But I have a video on a game camera where there's a stick swinging at the camera and smashing it. But you don't see nothing else but the stick coming and the camera goes blank.
That's fascinating stuff. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, not a whole lot, but
okay.
But I do want to say this: your channel has given me the courage to come forward and talk about this after all these years. And I was terrified at first about talking about it because I haven't told anybody a lot of the details, and I didn't want to extreme detail because it would make it way too long. But your channel and, you know, the way you treat people, you know, very respectful. It's been a blessing, and it's helped me to heal from a lot of the damage that was done back then. And it's given me the courage to start going back in the woods like I used to and doing the things I used to. And I really appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough.
Oh.
And I can't thank your viewers enough for the respect that they give the people that are willing to share. And it gave me the courage to identify myself about who I am instead of hiding behind something. And I hope myself coming forward and identifying and letting you know exactly who I am gives other people the courage to come forward and tell the truth no matter what anybody else thinks. Because if you tell something you know is true and somebody makes fun of you, they're bullying you, and that's not right. It's not right for somebody else to force their opinions on you, and you should do it anyway because it's not going to affect your integrity to the right people, and you really want to be affiliated with the right people instead of the wrong people.
Yeah, I agree with that, and thank you for saying that. We, mainly we have the nicest audience on the internet. I mean, obviously you've read through the comments, and they're just great people. I'm not a big internet person, but I've heard stories of how, there's some really mean people out there, and I've had experiences with a couple. I think 90% of people feeling comfortable about sending their encounters in and talking like you are now is because of the audience, not necessarily me.
This recording and this conversation is dealing with a lot of emotional issues too, as well as an encounter. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's really hard to talk about this stuff for people that have dealt with these kind of things. And it's a touchy subject even to this day, but it's not near as touchy as it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Chet and I went back and forth. We've been texting and emailing probably over the last week. And up until right before we started recording, he wanted to be anonymous and just use a pseudonym or whatever. Until right before we started, he goes, no, you know what? Let's use my name. I'm just going to step forward and tell this. And I really appreciate that. And not necessarily any more than if you would have stayed anonymous, I would have been just as tickled to death to talk to you. But, it takes some guts to do that, really. And I hope you don't catch any crap off of this. I don't think you will. I don't think you will.
At this point in my life, I'm a business owner. I'm a homeowner. I own several new cars. I'm well established. I have a pretty decent bank account. And honestly, people's opinion at this point in my life, if they have a negative opinion of me, I don't need them in my life. You know, I've been a CDL instructor. I've been a driver trainer. You know, I own a trucking company, and I really don't care what other people think about me because it's not going to affect me. If they're negative, then I need nothing to do with them. You know, negative people are just, you know, they're closed-minded people. They suffer because of it. They're not open to people's truths, even though they don't believe it, because it doesn't fit in their environment. They're not comfortable with it. And I really don't care about other people's opinion of me because I'm still going to be the same person I am tomorrow or the next day or no matter what happens. You could put me on the national news, and the national news can make fun of me, and I'm still going to be successful. I'm still going to have my life, and I'm still going to enjoy my life. And I'm only sharing this because, not because it makes me feel better, but because it may help other people to feel better and be more comfortable with sharing and getting something off their chest that they weren't able to do before.
Yeah, that'll be the positive outcome of this. And well, we're at about 58 minutes. Do you have any parting words for I know don't use ammonia when you're don't use ammonia when you go out in the woods.
My positive words are, if you experience it, share it. Closed-minded people are going to make fun of you for it, and they're not a friend. And you don't need those kind of people in your life. But there are people out there that will believe you because they trust you, not because they've had an experience, because they trust you and they like you. And that's going to show you the difference between true friends and false friends.
Yeah.
And if you tell something like this to somebody and they make fun of you, then they're a false friend. Either that or they're afraid. I will tell you that fear in life is not the thought of what's going to happen, but the thought of things that could happen.
Yep.
You should live your life without fear. I mean, caution, yes, but not fear. Don't be afraid to share things that you've been through because somebody may laugh or whatever, because there may be 20 people that laugh, but there also may be one or two people that have experienced it and been afraid to share it. A lot of people are missing out because they're not willing to share it.
Right. My recommendation would be selective who you talk about it to, because, you don't want to be sitting at a high school football game next to a guy you don't know and go, "Hey, man, you ever seen a Bigfoot?" "I have." You're more than likely, because
you don't want to do that.
because the topic is so, it's out there, and it's
taboo.
Yeah, and it has been made a joke, and actually some of the jokes are kind of funny. I mean, they really are. We have to be able to laugh at ourselves and still be good with ourselves. If you have any kind of sense of humor at all. But if you're deer hunting with a buddy or whatever, and y'all talk about some serious stuff, I mean, I can't think of all the circumstances it would be, a good time to tell people. But I appreciate your fortitude and your courage to step forward on this interview. And I really tip my hat. I raise my beer to you, man. It's awesome. I want to thank you for doing this. I want to keep in touch. All that said, I just want to tell you thanks for coming on. And by the way, Chet has a YouTube channel called Hillbilly Holler, and I'm going to link it in the description below. It's kind of funny because he just told me today that he did, and it's not Bigfoot related at all. He's not, he's not coming on to do an interview to try to boost his YouTube channel. But click that link if you feel like it. He's got awesome Tell us about your channel just a little bit before we wind up here, Chet.
Well, my channel has nothing to do with cryptids or anything like that. I've researched it on my own time out of curiosity with cryptids and, trying to figure out what this was and, if anybody else has ever experienced it. But my channel is about building small engines and go-karts and, showing people how to fix things on their own, working on generators and how to unclog a drain with a shop vac and, things like that. It's like home repairs and, a little bit about my life, a little bit about my hobbies is all it is. It absolutely has nothing to do about that.
Yeah, it's funny because when he told me before we got started, I looked up his channel and I noticed a video that I had seen probably a year ago about a driveway grader that he built to pull behind his riding lawnmower that worked really well. And I remember seeing the video. So and when I get to searching videos, I'm probably like everybody else. I just start, oh, that looks good. So I'll click that. So he does have a YouTube channel. And if you feel like it, go over, check him out. If you like his content, click the subscribe button. Now, he didn't ask me to do this. Chet did not ask me to do this. Well, that's going to wind up this video, guys. I really appreciate it. I thank you, Chet, for coming on. And we'll see you guys on the next video. All right.